Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from the Red Hot Chili Peppers called The Getaway. You know, I think in nearly 600 reviews, I don't think I've ever really talked much about the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Now, part of that is they haven't released an album since 2011 and they're a considerable distance outside of their heyday, but on some level, what is there really to say about this band? I've yet to find a person who seriously dislikes the Red Hot Chili Peppers and their genre-pushing blend of alternative rock, rap rock, and funk. And while I'd never say they made classic albums, they sure as hell kept up a steady stream of singles that have always been a ton of fun. I always found it a little bit interesting that they managed to chug through the 80s with very little success in the underground before blowing up for a solid 2 decades and becoming rock staples. And yet, with all that in mind, while I can definitely say that I like this band, I would never say they were one of my favorites or that we really need more Red Hot Chili Peppers material. It's not like their string of classic songs in the 90s and 2000s are going anywhere, come on here. But you can tell in the post-Frusciante years that the Red Hot Chili Peppers are not simply content to rest on their laurels. First putting out a pretty decent album in 2011 with Josh Klinghoffer on guitar, but even that didn't seem like enough. So after a collection of EPs and live albums, they left longtime producer Rick Rubin to try something different for their newest album, The Getaway, enlisting Brian Burton, aka Danger Mouse. Now, I've had some mixed experiences with Danger Mouse in the past couple of years. A few good, but most underwhelming, but I had no idea how his style would meld with the Chili Peppers, which tend to be a wilder, more colorful group than he'd usually work with. In other words, I was definitely willing to give The Getaway a chance, so what do we get? Well, honestly, while I'm tempted to say it's a new post-Frusciante Chili Peppers record, of course it's good but not great and just call it a day, I'd argue there's a little bit more going on here than you would otherwise expect coming from this band. The question comes whether or not it all works, with the short answer being yes, mostly, with a lot of qualifications. The weird thing is that while I think this album is certainly thought-provoking, it's not for many of the reasons that I suspect for many people will listen to the Chili Peppers in the first place, especially casual fans, so I'm not exactly sure this is easy to recommend, even though it is a pretty decent record. And the place we need to start off with is the instrumentation and the production, because the switch from Rick Rubin to Brian Burton is considerable and it definitely shows up on this album. To put it bluntly, Rick Rubin is a much more immediate producer and adding naked muscle and edges, whereas Danger Mouse tends to focus more on grooves and more hollowed out liquid textures in the guitars and synth. And on top of that, they also hired on Nigel Godrich, most well known for working with Radiohead for all the mixing. And man, you can tell, because this album definitely does not have the bite or immediate firepower of previous albums, with more pianos and synthesizers balancing out or even overtaking the guitars or the funk elements that are potent but never explosive. And sure, to compensate, they added in a lot of strings and organ and even a trumpet on the Hunter, which is kind of awesome, but it further intensifies a more somber and melancholic mood that doesn't really seem to match some of the compositions. Sure, you get cases like the piano fleshing out the melody on Dark Necessities, which easily remains one of the best songs on this album, or the gleaming early 80s-esque synths behind Go Robot, or the spacious pseudo-psychedelic textures on Encore, or the utterly warped psychedelic funk of Dreams of a Samurai that builds to a pretty huge chorus that I really liked, but even there you get the feeling that the actual guitar lines don't have the same color outside of the far too few solos. Now what's a little bit more questionable are the choices to blur the guitars deeper into the foggy textures of the mix. Again, these tracks do feel cohesive, and so does this album, and it's probably easier to mask Frusciante's absence by doing this, but what I liked about a lot of his guitar work in the past is that it's often anchored defiantly distinctive guitar melodies that stuck as great hooks in their own right. And what's frustrating is that this might have just been a preemptive measure that didn't need to happen, mostly because Josh Klinghoffer's compositions are pretty solid in his guitar lines, when his guitars get the space to breathe through them. And that's not counting Brian Burton's tonal choices that have been occasionally questionable in the past couple of years and remain so here, like the flat, gooey tone of the guitar on the hook of Goodbye Angels, where the wiry synth has more bite than it, or the ugly compression soaking the mix on Six Love that actually has a piano line from Elton John of all people, or the wheedling background textures on the verses of Feasting on the Flower. And what's more frustrating is when they try for a more aggressive mix like on Detroit, the thin fidelity of the vocal pickup seems like a cheap way to make the song seem like it's got more edge than it actually does, which they also try on the blocky and muddy layering on the verses of This Ticonderoga, which sounds messy as hell and clashes painfully with the much cleaner hook. It clicked a little bit better on the heavier punch of We Turn Red, but even then the hook just drowns out the funk edge of the guitar line in a blur of strings and percussion. The acoustic line, it sounds fine, but it kind of undercuts the mood on a record that really could have used some much heavier hooks. But then again, maybe that was actually the point. And that takes us to the lyrics and themes. Now, full disclosure, I have a limited amount of patience for the batshit non sequiturs that you tend to expect all over a Red Hot Chili Peppers album, and Anthony Kiedis does have his fair share of these. I mean, I can tolerate the scattershot politics of We Turn Red up to a point, but when we get him saying, do the avocado, I start finding this hard to take all that seriously. And that's always been the tough line that the Red Hot Chili Peppers have tended to walk, between loose, offbeat fun and a deeper sense of melancholy. But with this album, the production naturally tilts into a more somber tone, and that's a rougher fit than usual for most of Kiedis' weirder lyrics. And that makes the tone even more confused, especially because for a significant portion of this album, this is a breakup album, focusing on the failed relationship between Kiedis and an Australian model that was barely out of her teens, less than half his age. And to be blunt, Kiedis actually manages to get some considerable emotion out of these songs. I'm not always wild about his delivery, especially on the songs like the very clipped Feasting on the Flowers, which doesn't at all match the theme focusing on the overdose and death of former Chili Peppers member Hillel Slovak. But when you get songs like The Longest Wave or the title track, the angst is palpable. It does work. Hell, that's what redeems the ending tracks on this album, where Kiedis retreats into his own psyche and the disheveled mess of his past and doesn't find anything close to good results, which lends a real edge to the tribute to his father on The Hunter, or the breakdown on Dreams of a Samurai. And yeah, it definitely adds some weight to Dark Necessities, a song commenting on how art is often enriched by our darker impulses. But the larger problem is that Kiedis cannot commit to a consistent lyrical tone. Take the second to last verse on Goodbye Angels, where the line is, welcome to the party, it's a ball game, pick up the stick, it's time to get hit with ayo, 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 my bat. One, that's not how baseball works, and two, I get the sense it's just a dick joke in disguise, and that kind of hurts the mood of a breakup song. And sure, out there sex references have always been part of Chili Peppers songs. I'm willing to excuse the lines about spanking the robot on Go Robot for at least having a little bit more context, believe it or not. Kind of works within the song, but when the production isn't as colorful and the lyrical subject matter trends darker, they just kind of feel out of place with this sort of material. And speaking of out of place, I get the loose thematic connection to the faded decay of Detroit, and I actually prefer the song has a little bit more energy to it, but stuffing it full of go nowhere Detroit references definitely does not help the song hold together or really fit with the rest of the album. But you know what, to summarize, The Getaway, it's kind of a weird but pretty decent entry in the Red Hot Chili Peppers catalog, and I'm not sure if I'm willing to embrace it completely if I'm being honest. It's certainly one of the more experimental projects while maintaining their classic sound, but many of those experiments don't drive big returns, at least many songs not really coming together as well as they should. I'm genuinely curious how well Chili Peppers fans will react to the production and content choices behind this album, if they even really care about the content, but as it is, I'm feeling a very strong 6 out of 10 and a tentative recommendation. If you're a casual Chili Peppers fan and you're curious, it's worth a listen, but I would hesitate to put it among some of their best. Otherwise, I'd check out their 90s and 2000s work before this album, but if you're interested in the more melancholic side of this band, I guess it's worth a listen, so yeah, check it out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be very grateful. More than ever, I've got the poll up here. I want to know what you guys thought about this album. Do you think the change of producers managed to work for them, or just that Brian Burton not really clicked with the Chili Peppers sound? I'm kind of on the fence with it, if I'm being honest. But if there's anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I will try to give them a listen. Next on the docket, I got YG and Swans coming up soon. Probably have some time for the John Party album too. But till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.